Hi everyone, Tally and Farrell here, and we are bored of it. So, with the latest game in the Nemesis series of board games recently being released and being fulfilled and coming to stores, which is Nemesis Lockdown, we thought we'd put together a buyer's guide to help you learn about the differences between this and the original Nemesis, understand if you need both, and find out which one we prefer.
So we're going to go through both games. We're going to timestamp the video into sections. So if you know everything there is to know about Nemesis, you can just jump to Nemesis Lockdown. And we're just going to structure it. What is Nemesis? What is Nemesis Lockdown? How does it play? What are the differences? And finally, which do we recommend? Can you get both? Things like that. Can you combine all the material, for example? But let's jump straight to it with what is Nemesis? Nemesis is an unofficial adaptation of the Alien movie franchise into a survival horror board game. The board game is wildly popular and it is currently ranked the 17th best board game of all time. In terms of plot, you will all be characters aboard the titular ship, the Nemesis, and the game begins when you are awoken from hibernation with hibernation amnesia, which means you can't remember who you are or the layout of the ship. But what you do know is that the ship is in pretty bad condition and you're off course. Oh, and there's a dead crew member on the floor down there. And there's some really creepy noises coming from that hallway. Oh, don't worry about them. That's just the dogs.
This is termed a standalone expansion, meaning that you can just buy this and play it without the base game. Lockdown is set after Nemesis, when the ship has made it to a corporate facility on Mars. The survivors have been taken away and locked up, as have the intruder samples and eggs. Obviously, all hell breaks loose, and now you've got to escape this Martian facility. It's a card-driven game where each player will take on the role of a unique character with a unique deck of cards and set of abilities. On a turn, a player can play their cards to do the action written on a card, or discard any cards to do basic actions like move, attack, or do the action of the room they're in. It's a semi-cooperative game in that everyone will have a secret objective, which might involve the death of another player. But you'll need to work together to make sure the ship doesn't get too damaged before you're able to make your escape. Usually, you'll be moving around the ship in an attempt to find where you need to go to fulfill your objective. But whenever you move, you make noise. Make too much noise and you're going to attract an intruder, which is their rubbish little brand name for xenomorphs. Essentially, this game is harsh, unforgiving, and heavily luck-based. Be aware that it can be table-flippingly frustrating, and players can die and be out of the game hours apart from each other. However, this is used to great effect to create drama, tension, and some epic moments. If you're looking for a board game that's going to allow you to create some memorable stories with a group of friends, or a pure survival horror experience, then arguably no other game does it better.
Here, we're going to go through all of the content that is available for Nemesis, but I do believe availability can vary wildly, so I don't know how easy it is to get your hands on any of this. But you of course have the Nemesis core box, which is the game itself and everything that comes with it, components, miniatures, characters, etc. Then you have kind of 3 box expansions. So 2 of them, Carnomorphs and Void Seekers, are alternate alien races that you can use in place of the intruders from the base game, and they just play differently. You also have the Aftermath expansion, which kind of you use as an epilogue to a game you play of Nemesis. So you play a game of Nemesis, and then once you're done, you do Aftermath, and that is the story of a ship who kind of discovers the Nemesis after the events of your games. It plays in much less time, about an hour, has new characters, which I believe can be folded into the core game, and they have new objectives to do. Then there's kind of a standalone character expansion called the Medic, and she just has a character board, new cards, and she kind of just floats around there somewhere, not in any of these kind of big expansions. And finally, you have Untold Stories 1 and 2. And this is a cooperative campaign for Nemesis in the form of a bunch of tokens and some graphic novels. And the graphic novels kind of tell you how to set up stories from the crew of Nemesis. You work your way through the campaign. Each scenario kind of changes the gameplay or the setup of the ship in specific ways. And here you kind of read the story through the graphic novel. So you do something in the game and then you flick to the passage and it tells you what's happening. And that is the content available for Nemesis.
Obviously, you have the core box, which allows you to play Nemesis Lockdown. If you're a backer on Kickstarter, you have a whole other second box of stretch goals. This includes a new alien race, the fungi-based Critids. It also includes Untold Story 3, which allows you to run a co-op story-driven campaign using Nemesis Lockdown. And lastly, it includes a whole other bunch of upgraded components, such as plastic doors to replace the cardboard ones from the core game, along with other cards and components which allow you to incorporate the Nemesis expansions into Nemesis Lockdown if you want to play with those characters or aliens. Now, there are two characters, the hacker and the xenobiologist, which were listed as stretch goals, but we're pretty sure they are part of the core game, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to play with 5 players, and ours did come in the core game. However, we can't confirm this one way or the other. Either way, we have no knowledge of what stretch goal content will be available, if at all, in retail.
So, what is the same and what is different between these two boxes? Well, at the core, a lot of Nemesis Lockdown is the same. It plays in the same way, you're going to be doing the same things, you have the same objectives. The Night Stalkers, as they're termed here, are identical to the Intruders. And you're going to be playing cards, exploring rooms, and trying to complete those objectives. What is different is that you have new characters with new abilities that tie into the new mechanics introduced in Lockdown, and they're all really interesting and diverse. You have a few new mechanisms, so you have a power mechanic where you can power up levels of the facility, because the facility is now split into levels and there's an elevator you can use to go up and down. And if you power up the section that you're in, you have advantages. The noise tokens are removed at the end of the round. You get to roll a better dice if you're attacking an alien. And you also can use computer actions in a computer room, which are like special little actions you can do, and they change throughout the game. And generally, you won't get such negative event cards and attack cards. You kind of can ignore some of what they say if you're in a section with power. Now, you also have a contingency token mechanism, which introduce like another barrier to escaping. And thematically, the director of the facility has sent a signal to the corporation telling them who to save and who to kill. And all players will begin with one of these tokens. One will be set on the board, that's secret, and that is the active contingency. And then there'll be the rest that aren't in play placed in the Nexus. And what you kind of do is work together, if your objective isn't to kill another player, to figure out what the active contingency is. Because it might say something like, kill anyone that leaves in a CSS pod. So if you've left in a CSS pod, you instantly die. So it's kind of like another puzzle to figure out, and it gets table talk going between the players. And there's a variety of these, so you do have to work together. And there are different mechanisms of escape now. You have the CSS pods, which you kind of go into a room and they launch on very specific rounds, and you don't know which ones are launching, and you might be able to figure it out through deduction, but you might not, and you kind of have to guess. And then if that pod launches, that matches the room that you're in, you will get out successfully, or if you don't, you'll take a wound. You can take a rover and go out the main gate of the facility, except that main gate only opens if someone dies or if the auto-destruct sequence has gone past being reversed. Then you also have an isolation room, which you can lock yourself in, which is within the facility. That only opens halfway through the game. One thing that's a little different is to do with a system of knowledge. You still have intruder weaknesses, and you still have to discover them the same way as in Nemesis by analyzing alien objects. But here you have to also have enough knowledge, which is a new track that you can move up by doing specific actions. The more knowledge you have, the more weaknesses you're kind of allowed to take advantage of. And knowledge plays in other ways as well, in terms of characters, or maybe if you survive the game, or objectives. And it's just a little bit different, but it works quite well, particularly with some of the new characters like the xenobiologist. Many of the rooms in Nemesis Lockdown are new, and they tie into the mechanics that have been introduced in this game, but there are also some familiar faces returning. So there is a lot of new mechanisms here that they don't really change anything, but they're layered over, so it does add more complexity. And yeah, I think that's essentially most of the new things that you can expect. You should be able to mix and match content as you wish. You can certainly use the characters from Nemesis and Aftermath in Nemesis Lockdown, although the rules do state that it will be a tougher experience if you do, and the more of those characters you have in your session, the tougher the entire game will be. And there are also rules in place to use the Carnomorphs and the Void Seekers in Nemesis Lockdown. And really, you could probably just use them using those rules, but the stretch goals do also include new attack and event deck for those alien races to help facilitate them with the new mechanisms. And finally, you can also use the Night Stalkers from Lockdown with Nemesis, and there are rules for that. Now, this is a personal opinion, but we don't believe that anyone needs both of these games. Unless, of course, you're a massive Nemesis fan, in which case, let's be honest, you've already bought Lockdown, you probably already have it and have played it, and you're just going to ignore us. But we say this because if you have one of these games, so much of what the other provides is redundant, particularly in terms of the components that come with it, but also in terms of a lot of other things. In each game, you have the Intruders and the Night Stalkers, and they're mechanically the same. They just have different miniatures. A lot of the cards are the same. You have similar events in both. You have almost identical objectives in both. A lot of the items are the same. The attack cards are the same. And at its core, the gameplay is the same. You're going to be moving around somewhere, discovering rooms, trying to complete your objective, and running or fighting the Intruders. So, because these are such expensive big box games and there's so much redundancy between the two, it's hard to recommend that you own both when you consider the hundreds of dollars that would cost.
If you're only going to get one, then we'd say go for Lockdown. Its characters are more interesting and the mechanics are more evolved. It is the more engaging experience. That said, because of this, the complexity is just a little bit higher. So if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, then we'd say go for the core Nemesis. It is an almost identical experience, just with less rules overhead and things to worry about.
Yep. So that has been our comparison of Nemesis and Nemesis Lockdown, our buyer's guide, if you will. So we really hope that it helped you. I guess elucidate the difference between the two, figure out which one you want. They're both great games. We've really enjoyed them. We've played a lot of Lockdown lately. But if this was helpful in any way, we would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to our channel. We also are going to have, or have had, depending on when you're watching this, a review of Nemesis Lockdown. So you can check that out. And most importantly, thank you for watching. And please just ask us any questions you have.
We're happy to answer.
See ya.